Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Spring 2025 series of the Tuesday Times Roundtable. We have a very distinguished panel with us today, which we're going to be introducing in a little bit. They're going to be presenting on the pathways to global impact, USAID, the Department of State, and diplomacy careers. The Tuesday Times Roundtable is the Office of Global Learning Initiative's flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends, while fostering meaningful conversations on topics that align to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All the TTR sessions are recorded, and you can learn more about TTR, watch past recordings, or come back to reference this one by going to go.fiu.edu/TTR. Please take a moment to sign in by using this QR code or the link in the chat. As a reminder, our sign-in closes at 12:30 p.m., so don't wait until later to do the sign-in. If you're here either for Global Learning Medallion points, for the Honors College Engagement points, or extra credit from your professor, we are happy that you're here. My name is Janeri Mendoza-Farjan, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. A special thank you to our team who is going to be monitoring the chat for us, Program Manager Michelle Saldivar, and our graduate assistants, Natalia and Gitanjali. If you happen to have questions, feel free to use the chat section or the Q&A section. To learn more about the opportunities at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, including the Peace Corps Prep Program, the Millennium Fellowship, or the Global Learning Medallion Program, feel free to visit goglobal.fiu.edu/students, or also scan this QR code and it will take you to our Instagram page where you will learn more about engagement opportunities. We also have drop-in hours with the peer advisor, so you may come on Thursdays from 3 to 5 p.m. And a friendly reminder to all the Global Learning Medallion students to do a screenshot of your sign-in so you may use it for your activities log. Also, the transformation contest is open until January 31st. We're going to have another info session this coming Friday, January 24th, so you can learn more about how to apply to have an opportunity to win a trip to Washington, D.C. By sharing a transformational, intercultural, or international experience that you had in a creative way. You may visit goglobal.fiu.edu/students scholarships to learn more about it. Our Tuesday Times Roundtable, they center always in a global issue or trend. Today's session is linked to a New York Times article that you may access at go.fiu.edu/TTR0121. And this is because FIU provides everyone with an FIU email with free access to the New York Times. If you don't have an account yet, you may access it by going to accessnyt.com. Also, today's session on diplomacy careers relates to SDG number 17, partnerships for the goals by strengthening the means and implementation of global partnerships and sustainable development, including multi-stakeholders, partnerships, and national strategies. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Pierina Anton Lopez. She is a foreign service officer at USAID, and also a very dear FIU alumni to the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. A little bit about Pierina. She's currently in long-term language training at a Foreign Service Institute in preparation for her diplomatic assignments as an education officer with USAID in Senegal. Pierina previously served as acting desk officer for USAID, El Salvador, and Central America Mission, where she was the primary point of contact for USAID mission staff programs and the political context of the country at the region. At USAID, Pierina has supported the agency education, youth workforce development, and teacher training activities in El Salvador and Bangladesh. She had also worked in expanding USAID engagement and partnerships with Hispanics serving institutions in the United States. And Pierina earned her master's of Global Human Development from Georgetown University as a USAID Donald M. Payne International Development Fellow, and also a Bachelor's in Arts in International Relations from Florida International University. She's a proud Venezuelan American and a passionate advocate for first generation students. Welcome, Pierina. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Jonetti. It is so great to be here. I wish that I was at FIU at the MMC campus in person, but it's great to be joining everybody virtually. Like you mentioned, I'm here at the Foreign Service Institute in Washington, D.C. Well, actually in Virginia, but I'm preparing for my diplomatic assignment, and I'm so excited to introduce this distinguished panel of guests that are joining us to talk a little bit about their careers in development and diplomacy. So starting off, we have Kenneth MacLean, who is the USAID Resident Advisor and Distinguished Fellow at FIU. We also have joining us Stewart Devine, Foreign Service Officer and Recruitment Advisor from the Department of State, and Maximo Ulloa, a 2022 Charles B. Rangel Fellow at the Department of State, and also an FIU alumni from the class of 2022. So we're really excited to be able to chat today about their experiences and backgrounds and take all your questions on what a career in diplomacy and development looks like. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the questions for the panelists, and I'll start off with Ken. If you can share a little bit about your background and how you began your career at USAID.
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for the introduction and for arranging the session as well. I think it's great speaking to students. And for those I haven't met out there, I am based at FIU in the LAC Center and teach a class on international development. So my own background, I started out in private sector. I was doing technology consulting back in the day. I think I got into thinking about international development. First, it was kind of this series of reflections I would do. There's one thought experiment where you picture yourself on your deathbed and look back and try to visualize what do you want to see as the landscape of your life. And technology consulting was interesting, but I think I wanted more. And eventually through, I'd say, other influences, whether that's, I was reading a lot of Henry David Thoreau at the time, this guy, Richard Alpert, and someone else who wrote about international development, Graham Hancock. And that got me more thinking about specifically a life more focused on service, like trying to make the world better in simpler terms. And in doing that, on focusing on some of the poorest people in the world, and that brought me to international development. I initially, I referenced Graham Hancock. I initially thought working for like USAID or multilateral, like the United Nations, straight. But I think Graham Hancock wrote about some of the challenges of doing that. So I decided first to do grassroots development. So I worked in international development, working for NGOs. And I kind of retired from that and then joined USAID as a mid-career officer back in 2011. And since 2011, I've been, first time I was in Iraq and then Yemen, and then mostly I've been in Central America between first Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, and soon I'll be going to the Dominican Republic.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ken. It's always so interesting to hear about how different folks at the agency get their start in development, what inspired them. So I'd also like to turn the floor to our colleagues from the State Department. Stewart and Maximo, if you could share a little bit about your background and how you began your career at the Department of State.
I tell you, it's a wonderful story, but it's an average story. I'm a first gen, just like so many other people. I'm a former military and all of these kinds of things. And I remember, and this is very true, I remember I had business to do at the American Embassy in Tokyo, Japan. I was assigned to Japan in the military over there. So I met with this guy and he goes, "Hey, you ought to consider the Foreign Service." I said, "What's that?" So he talked to me about it and I played him off. Then my wife said, "Why don't you go back, buy the guy some coffee and learn more about it?" And that's exactly what I did. And he says, "You really should think about this." And I remember saying, "Are you sure?" I'm nothing special. I will never forget that. I'm nothing special. And he told me, because of the fact that you don't think you're something special, you should consider the Foreign Service. So what I tell people, now that I've been in the Foreign Service for how many years, is I advise them, you are something. You can aspire to this. You don't have to have a degree in international relations or foreign relations or political affairs. You don't have to change your major. You don't have to do any of those things. The first thing you have to do is just get over, if you will, the belief that you can't do it, just like I did. I failed the Foreign Service officer test the first time, made it the second time. I've served in Fiji, Korea twice, Iraq twice, Afghanistan, the Netherlands, gee whiz, Frankfurt, Germany at the regional center there. I've held multiple positions from an economic affairs officer. I've been a foreign policy advisor to the 3-star commanding general of the Middle East when I was assigned there. So I've had all of these assignments, and yet I graduated from FIU in 1980, believe it or not, with a 2.6 GPA. Again, nothing special. But I sort of had this thing saying, "Stewart, give it a shot." I advise you to do the same thing. Don't think you can't do what I'm doing and Maximo and what Pierina are doing. You can.
Thank you so much, Stewart. That is such an inspiring story, and it is definitely not average. It is so inspiring to hear how you got your start. And I want to turn it over to Maximo to share a little bit about his journey and entry into the Foreign Service as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. First off, pause up. It's been forever since I've done that, so it warms my heart a little bit, especially in the weather up here. It is absolutely freezing right now in Virginia. I'm happy to say that one of my main inspirations for why I joined the State Department is actually in this room. Pierina and I were teammates in our MAU-UN team over at Florida International University, and we shared a whole bunch of classes together. And I think a lot of people consider that the Foreign Service, or becoming a diplomat in general, is something that's only available for, an older crowd, that you can't initially go in during your young 20s or even shortly afterwards. That's far from the truth. And I think a lot of that good foundation, both within yourself and in terms of the academic know-how, can come from your time here in Florida International University. I'm so thankful for the certificates that were offered, certain courses like Diplomacy Lab. I actually had bumped into a former professor of mine randomly down the road in DC the other day, and I was just just pleading, not necessarily pleading, but thanking profusely about the inspiration, because I could draw a full line from me being able to succeed in that class to then me having the inspiration to work with the State Department. I had a brief history in terms of working with public officials before, on the local level, state level, the national level. So I often joke that my future in the State Department is me just trying to get further and further away from the states. But it's been amazing so far. I'm currently set to work in Bucharest for my first tour as an economic officer. And it's thankfully been supported through the Charles B. Rangel Fellowship, which I'm happy to talk about in further detail, which is a very affordable and a very open way where state recruits typically about 45 to 90 individuals per year, to fill in a need for more diverse figures and more underrepresented folks within our department. So happy to yap a bit more about that later on.
Thank you so much, Max. It's a great point that you mentioned about kind of that straight line through our experiences at FIU and what drove us to pursue this career, and the importance of the network that we build at FIU, and how even now, after 4 or 5 years of being out of FIU, we're still running into our professors here in DC and remembering the impact that they had on us and that drove us to this career. So I want to talk a little bit more about what a typical day actually looks like in a career in global development or diplomacy. I know that a lot of us are foreign service officers, so I wanted to start off with maybe speaking a little bit about what a typical day as a foreign service officer looks like. Stewart and Ken, can you share a little bit more about what does your day-to-day look like as an FSO?
Who should go first?
Case. We have a lot of atypical days in diplomacy, I imagine, regardless of whether USAID or the U.S. Department of State. However, it does depend on your career track and your career category. Now, as a foreign service officer, I chose the management career track. Yes, I have served as an economic affairs officer. I've served as political and consular. This is true. But on an average day, in my particular case, I'm actually engaged with the people at the mission, and I'm also engaged with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that are dealing with diplomatic accreditation and other issues that come up. And believe it or not, in diplomacy, we're even dealing with lawsuits. Let's say you're not a management career track officer and you happen to be a political affairs officer. They're the ones that are going to deal with the bilateral relationship between the host nation, the embassy, and the United States. Now, there's one thing to understand. There is no one that sets policy, foreign policy at any embassy. All foreign policy is set by the Secretary of State and the President and the various advisors. However, we do have input. So for someone that loves drafting and writing, I'm telling you right now, as a foreign service officer, we will draft and write more than you ever thought over a career. In fact, probably during your first tour. And that's what you do. You attend a lot of meetings. You may note take for a VIP that's coming in, and then you have to draft all of that up. Or if you're a note taker for a negotiation, you draft all of that up. You get it cleared by the various stakeholders that are involved. Once it's cleared, it's classified, top secret, secret, confidential, or SBU, and it gets sent to Washington, and they will determine what to do next. However, on an average day, you come in when the embassy opens up at 8:30, as an example. You come in maybe around 8 o'clock, and you leave around 5. We do have weekends off, we do have vacations, and we travel.
And I can chime in now. Yeah, so just to reiterate what Stewart said, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a typical day, but I'll run through some quick stuff. So in USAID, you know, there's also different career paths. So there's technical offices. It could be someone specializing in education, agriculture, civil society, governance, lawyers that specialize in rule of law. And then, so those are all technical offices. Then you have support officers, and it could be someone who's like a controller, like an accountant, someone who deals with all the contracting that we do, because we do a lot of contracting and grants to local international organizations, or someone really focusing on like kind of strategy and kind of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or like the operational side, the people that deal with kind of the general management, human resources, facilities, et cetera. So it really depends where you are. And then your normal day will differ if you're in senior management. Like, you know, for me, when I'm at mission, I'm, you know, as mission director, and I'll be mission director in the Dominican Republic. You know, a lot of my time is spent either, reading, writing, talking, and listening. And that's internal and external. And it could be also focusing on events, really important meetings, or working on strategy with the broader team on, how do we better improve the impact of our programs, like to improve the program quality, or dealing with recruitment issues, or morale issues, dealing with strategizing about managing relationship with the host government at the national level, local level, civil society leadership, or other partners like the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the different agencies, different development agencies or foreign ministries from different countries, and coordinating overall development. We probably spend a lot of time, I say a higher percentage of time, like in the field, because part of the work we do are designing and implementing development programs. And so we go to visit those programs to ensure like what we think's happening is actually happening, and also to make sure we're hearing directly from the targets of our programs, which are usually local communities. And so making sure there's a lot of community engagement. So part of our monitoring evaluation is in learning is to go out and do field visits. So especially the technical staff, I would say on a monthly basis, they try to get out and are visiting projects. Less so on like the support staff that are working like in management, accounting, or contracts management.
Thank you so much, Ken and Stewart, for sharing a little bit about what a typical or not so typical day could also look like, because we all know that this career is very unique and has a lot of different shapes and forms and sizes. So it's great to hear from your great experience. Max, I want to turn it over to you because you mentioned the fellowships earlier in your introduction. So what would you say was a typical day as a Rangel Fellow? And can you talk a little bit about the fellowship program? What does it entail, and what's the draw or the benefit of the fellowship programs?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, I happen to be one of 45 Charles B. Rangel Fellows from the 2022 cohort. That exists alongside the Thomas R. Pickering Fellowship, which is almost the same as Rangel, but I'll get into those details. We have an intellectual technology fellowship as well for those interested in helping with our IT folks. We also have a fellowship for diplomatic security folks. And we also, of course, have the Payne Fellowship, which Pierina happened to have gotten a year before I did. So congrats to you for that. But with the Rangel Fellowship, typically Congress funds this program every single year to where their entirety of their grad program gets fully funded alongside a stipend. And in each summer vacation that happens in between the grad years, you have either one internship domestically, whether that's with the State Department if you're a Pickering Fellow, or with Congress if you're a Rangel Fellow. And then afterwards, you have an internship abroad. I happen to serve my internship with the U.S. mission to the European Union in Brussels in the political section. And then you basically have a 5-year contract with the Department of State. After about 3 years, you get tenure. So basically, if you get one of these fellowships and you're fully dedicated to this career, you're basically set for life. It is honestly a blessing through congressional funding that I'm able to enjoy this career. So I spent most of my time as a Rangel Fellow just typically attending classes and just making sure that this was the right path to go. There's a nice sense of certainty knowing that you have the sort of roadmap laid ahead of you so that you could gear sort of your classes and your internships and whatever you do during your spare time towards this future. So I feel very prepared for what life's got to throw ahead of me in terms of my post in Bucharest. I'm not an econ officer per se. I entered as a political officer, but this is a full economics post. So I'm very thankful that having this sort of sense of relief, I was able to then focus a lot of my classes towards an econ dimension just in case. And what do you know? These fellowships have been going on for about 3 decades or so, and typically application cycles reopen come the summer. So if you're interested by any means, it is never too early to apply. I already started applying as a junior during my time at FAU. So if you are about to graduate at any point, you are a qualified candidate. They will only not accept your application if your GPA is below 3.2, or if you are 59, due to retirement purposes and things of that nature. But they just certainly want talent from wherever it comes from. And there has been a very competitive pool that has come from Florida International University just within the past few years alone. I think we've had, I don't want to overhype us too much, but at least maybe 5+ finalists, and certainly a few people who are also fellows. Another fellow within my specific Rangel cohort is also a mutual friend of Pierina and mine's. So there are plenty of opportunities available there, and happy to answer any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Max. It's all to say that the opportunities that we get at FIU really do prepare you to be a competitive applicant for these fellowships. And I also wanted to mention that these fellowships are 100% funded. So your tuition for graduate school, which we all know can be extremely, extremely expensive, is completely covered, as well as a stipend for housing and educational materials. And all of your internships are also covered as well. So it's a really great opportunity if you're interested in pursuing a career in the Foreign Service, and really, really helps you prepare for an incredible journey. So I want to talk a little bit as well about the different missions of our respective agencies. The theme of today's TTR is partnerships. So I'd love to hear from the panel about how their jobs and their agencies differ in terms of mission, and how you all work together with your state colleagues, your USAID colleagues simultaneously. Ken, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So if you look at USAID, it was created back in '61 by Kennedy. It was really to have one, at that time, trying to get all foreign assistance under one agency. And at that point in time, Kennedy more kind of framed why we want to do this in a series of moral obligations, on whether that's to, as a richest nation, help the poorest people, or to, with our own development, to then share with our like-minded countries, given the interconnectedness of the community of countries, or to, as the largest single country, to push back against those that are trying to go against freedom. But it's a lot about more obligations. I think over time that shifted to be much more like realpolitik, on we're doing development, but it's part of our foreign policy platform of defense, diplomacy, and development, and USAID is more on the development side. And seeing how our development programs then are working to advance our foreign policy priorities. One thing I should say, just because we had mentioned this earlier, I mean, just to mention it. One thing that's probably a bit different in USAID is joining USAID. Normally, you need to have a master's degree. So it's a bit different like that, because we're trying to recruit more technical experts for those technical areas I had spoken about beforehand. So it's a bit different coming into USAID because of that. And I would say in USAID, it's also, I think at first people think of themselves as like development professionals first, and secondarily diplomats. So it's not like everyone's head home a diplomat first. It's more about doing development work. And because of the nature of our work, it changes as well, where, if we're with that background, we spend a lot of time on like analyzing, just say there's a socioeconomic problem, just say it's high levels of gender-based violence, or high levels of violence because of of gangs operating in a certain country. So we spend a lot of time analyzing the problem, meeting with people at the highest level down to communities, and then trying to together craft a solution and then design it, like to have a theory of change of if the current state is X, we want to change it to here, and then do a design entire program to actually get at that and try to measure progress. And that's probably a very different kind of work stream at times than it is compared to state.
That's a good point on that. In fact, the U.S. Department of State, as we somewhat call it, traditional diplomacy, when you're really dealing with a lot of people at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, those are people that do all of that. But what I'd like to emphasize to many people that with the U.S. Department of State, similar to our sister agency at USAID, we have many career paths. Now, absolutely none of our Foreign Service career paths require a graduate degree. And as a Foreign Service journalist, it doesn't even require an undergraduate degree. Now, it is true, I'd say 86% of Foreign Service journalists or officers have undergraduate degrees, yes. But that's not an absolute requirement, but we have all kinds of career tracks. For example, we know, I think, Maximo, I believe you said you're the political career track, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so Maximo is going political, but we have 5 career tracks: political, economic affairs, management affairs, consular affairs, and public diplomacy, which is public relations. Those are our 5 Foreign Service officer or Foreign Service journalist career tracks. But Maximo, he also mentioned about IT, information technology. We have fields in the administrative field, including IT, in law enforcement, if you will, in security. Those are diplomatic security special agents. Now, they do require degrees. We have facility managers. So we want to emphasize that all of these different career tracks I'm talking about, they're all diplomats. They all go through the same course, the 6 weeks course that's for the orientation, which is 101, and et cetera. They're all going to go through a bidding process. They're all going to have a list of assignments. The first 2 assignments is a brand new Foreign Service person, regardless of whether you're a Foreign Service specialist or a Foreign Service generalist. The first 2 assignments are 2 years each, and you will have input on both of those assignments. However, the entry-level panel will make the decision. When you get to post, you're going to be working in one of those fields, and you're going to start engaging directly with whatever it is. You notice Maximo is going to be going out dealing with economic affairs. It's wild because, frankly, once he's commissioned Foreign Service officer, his first assignment may very well be in management or economic affairs or public diplomacy. So it all depends on what happens on your first 2 assignments. On your 3rd assignment and beyond, you will have maximum input to where you will be assigned overseas, but you will be working in your career track.
Thank you so much, Stewart. That actually leads me to the next question I wanted to ask, which was to Ken, since you just spoke about the different pathways with State Department to careers. What do career pathways at USAID look like? Is it just Foreign Service? Are there other ways that you can get involved? Can you talk a little bit about that, Ken?
Yeah, we're more than happy. Sure. So we've been, I think, talking more about the Foreign Service, but there's also the Civil Service. And so I'd say and this is more for American citizens, because you need to be American citizen to be a member of the Foreign Service or Civil Service because of security clearances. And so there's entry into the Civil Service and Foreign Service. However, but I do want to say something about non-American citizens. So I mentioned before, USAID does a lot of work on giving grants to organizations or contracts to organizations, both international organizations and local organizations. So because of that, there's a lot of people who work in international development that are working for USAID partners. And there's lots of opportunity to do so, I'd say, in the United States, at times overseas as well. or if you're hired locally. The majority of our staff are actually local hires. For instance, if I look at Honduras, like my last posting, I would say we had about 20 foreign service officers and about 100 local staff. And so it kind of depends. Now, on the partners, I'm not even sure the number of like what they would consider international staff that are working on their programs. But I would guess, I'd say probably compared to 20 in USAID, there'd probably be 60 that are working for various implementing partners. So the ways to get into USAID, there's, like when there's job postings on USA Jobs, and sometimes these advertisements looking for foreign service officers. And then there's the different internships or fellowships. So the pathways is probably the most common for internships. The fellowship is the Payne Fellowship, which others could probably talk about from experience more than I could. But like the Payne Fellowship is just a great deal where you apply as undergrad, and then I forget the exact dollar amount, but then you'll have work experience at USAID, and then USAID will contribute to around, I think it's around $52,000 a year towards a graduate degree. And right now that Payne Fellowship is really important just in hiring processes right now. Like we end up, after being very understaffed, we increased our staffing a lot. So we hit our level we wanted. So now we're looking at more just attrition hiring. And that'll mostly be happening through Payne Fellowships, which is a great pathway, for undergraduates, especially from minority serving institutions, because that program is designed specifically for those types of students.
Thank you so much, Ken and Stewart, for sharing. I want to ask one more question before we move into the questions from the audience, because we've been getting a few, but I know there's a lot of students that are joining right now, and they might be at different points in their academic careers. But if you could give one piece of advice, and I open this to everyone on the panel, what would be your top advice for students that are interested in pursuing a career in global diplomacy or development? Maximo, do you want to start?
Sure thing. Ultimately, for as scary as the application process might seem, whether you decide to apply through the fellowship process or through the traditional FSOT and FSOA, the important part is states not just looking for a traditional bureaucrat or some personality-less figure. They're searching for you specifically. They want somebody who can bring in their full breadth of talent, who has the full trust and faith of the US government to serve as our representative overseas, where a lot of people are going to interact with a US embassy or a US consulate abroad. You might be the first American that they ever have a genuine experience with. So if you happen to have any form of interest, whether it's through the traditional generalist tracks, the consular, public diplomacy, political, etc., or these specialist options, keep contributing at your best. Sometimes people get through this process so quickly. Sometimes it's a bit of a waiting game, but it all truly pays off in the end. I know that I had dreams of entering the Foreign Service immediately after grad school, not grad school, my time at FIU. And I had to wait a bit. I still did some domestic work, but I took those experiences from my time with domestic service, and they have been able to translate so perfectly to my time abroad. So it is just a continuous journey of the part of your life. It is a cheesy answer. I truly know that it is, but it is, quite frankly, what has led so many different people around the building I'm in right now to the journeys that there are today.
Thank you so much, Max. And there's a saying I think that goes, it's only a cliche because it's true, right? So definitely not cheesy and very, very spot on response. Stewart, Do you have any advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want to say to Maximo, I love cheese. I mean, I might cut a chunk off after this meeting right here. I'm pro cheese. I'm not anti-cheese. So, but I like that. I'm telling you now, I will always emphasize this because I speak to people most days and sometimes on the weekends, is that I'm telling you, we're not looking for what a lot of people think we're. I like the way Maximo said this. It's about content of character. You know, are you thoughtful? Do you have emotional intelligence? You notice I never mentioned one time what your degree is in general. I'm saying in general for foreign service generalists. I'm just saying in general. We're not talking about what your degree is. We don't care that you went to Yale, FIU, Miami-Dade Community College, you transitioned later. Those things are not the key factors at all. It is absolutely content of character. And you have to know that it is possible. Reach out to your diplomat in residence in your region now. In my case, or in your case in Florida, that's Jackie Fields. We've been assigned twice. Now we're assigned again, third time together. It's incredible. Overseas. But Jackie Fields is your diplomat in residence. We always advise people, regardless of which field you want to go to, if you want a fellowship, if you want an internship, if you're interested in being a foreign service specialist or a foreign service generalist, reach out to the DIR. Then you can get some real one-on-one FaceTime or at least on the phone or via digital video conference.
Thank you so much, Stewart. That's a great point about flagging the diplomat in residence. I remember early on in my FIU career, I was always talking to the DIR about getting their advice on what classes to take, what kind of internships I should be thinking about. They're an incredible resource. Ken, would you like to share any words of wisdom or advice to the FIU students?
Yeah, sure. I'll quote the great philosopher Nike. Just do it. No, I mean, I really mean that. Like people have it like, oh, it's so hard to get in. But everyone who's really wanted to get into just say international development, I'm going to talk about that first. They want to do it, and so it's just gaining experience, whether that's on coursework and then work experience, and just following that path, and you'll get into international development. If it's specifically on foreign service, I had mentioned the best pathway right now is probably, the Payne Fellowship. But if you're looking at a more traditional background, like longer term, like generally for USAID, you're going to need a master's degree, ideally international development, but not necessarily. I mean, that's more the generalist one. We have different like technical areas, so ours are probably broader. I think there are probably around 17 different hiring categories in USAID, whether that's from, I mentioned like financial management, or there's one in audit, ag, economics, engineering, environment, health, humanitarian assistance, etc. So it's there's a lot of different technical people that we hire. And just kind of gaining that experience is helpful. I missed my train of thought, sorry. So like on the generalist approach on like being just a general development and technical officer, the most traditional thing is, after undergraduate, doing Peace Corps or working for international NGO, getting experience, getting a master's degree, and then applying. For a straight undergraduate, it's going to be really, I'd say Payne is probably the best pathway. Second after that would be doing like pathway internships.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Definitely agree with everything that was said. And if I could just add one more thing, it would be to stay curious and to really take advantage of the professors and the resources that you have at FIU. If one of your professors has a background that interests you or says something during class that sparks your attention, go to office hours, ask them about it. Create your network and your relationships with your professors, because they really have such wide knowledge and experience and resources that can help you as you start thinking about what next steps to take in your academic or your professional career. And I'll never forget, I had a professor, Brian Fonseca, who told me this early on into my time at FIU. He said, start thinking about your life as like the way that CEOs of companies do. They have boards of advisors that they kind of cultivate to give them advice and recommendations anytime they make a major decision. And once I started applying that to my life, I mean, it was a game changer. So I'll impart that same wisdom to you all here. And I see that Max has his hand raised, so I'll go to you before we transition over to the questions from the audience.
Sure thing. Just wanted to say extra shout out to Brian Fonseca. That's the professor I was talking about bumping into randomly on the streets here in DC just a few days ago over at brunch out of all the silliest things. But I stole time away from him and his family just to thank him so much because genuinely speaking, some of the best inspiration that you're ever going to have during this whole career path will be amongst your friends and colleagues and mentors here at FIU. It's not just cheesy. It is. It's what gets your brunch interrupted at noon on a Sunday. So
I love that, Max. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so we've gotten a few questions from the audience. I'm gonna go based on the ones that have recently come in, and then we'll work our way backwards. But the first question that I see is the president signed executive orders on a hiring freeze and returning to office. How long are those hiring freezes in place for, and do both executive orders affect your agencies or do they not apply?
I can go first. Of course, they apply to us, and I'll specifically speak about USAID. I mean, we're executive branch. We follow the orders of the president as we do under any administration, and so they absolutely apply. I can't speak for how long these freezes will last. So we'll see. And there's other ones that more, I'd say, also directly impact us. There's also a freeze on like moving more money into existing programs. I talked about we have, like a lot of grants and contracts out there for a specific development purpose. And so there's an order right now to suspend any movement of money into any existing programs that we have for the next 90 days. There are, the Secretary of State will have ability to waive that in specific circumstances. But any of these executive orders will directly impact us.
Thank you, Ken. Go ahead, Stewart.
It's an issue, and it's good that people bring it up because I can imagine once executive orders were signed yesterday, and it's already been posted on the whitehouse.gov, you'll see that there. You'll see all of them. I don't know, almost 100 of those things, and the hiring freeze is one of them. DEIA is another issue that's going to be suspended. However, we, U.S. Department of State, we're going to continue our recruitment trends. We're not going to stop doing that because we cannot predict what's going to happen after the initial 90 days. And we cannot predict what's going to happen once OMB and the different agencies determine what staffing levels, et cetera. So it would be a mistake for us to cease recruitment efforts. So we are not going to slack off at all. We're going to go full forward.
Thank you both so much. This is also really interesting for me and Max to hear. I think, like, as former fellows, to hear about how our different agencies are going to continue with their recruitment. So thank you both for sharing that. The next question I see is, if you do a fellowship for diplomacy, do you still have to take the Foreign Service oral test, the FSOT?
That's a real good. Actually, that's Maximo. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak.
yeah, happy to respond to that. So yes. However, if you do happen to get one of the fellowships, the timeline can look a little different. So for example, I just happened to take the FSOT before I got the fellowship and was able to bring that with a passing score. But if you just get the fellowship, at some point within the next 2 years of grad school, you have to complete it at some point. Thankfully, the FSOT gets offered typically every few months. And I think there was a recent regulation change within the past few years to where you just have to take it not necessarily fully passing through, just take it and you're good to go. And then with the FSOA, you have up to 5 years to complete that one, which is a breath of fresh air. Not a breath of fresh air. It's a bit of a relief, because traditionally speaking, at least during the time when I had applied for the test, if you don't happen to pass the FSOA the first time, you restart the whole process again. FSOT, then FSOA. If the FSOA doesn't go your way the first time or the second time or the third time, you're at least back to that marker again. I have not heard any story in my personal capacity to where somebody has failed the FSOA so many times afterwards. And there is a huge network of different mentors and guides to put you through. When I got my training for the FSOA as a Rangel Fellow during my first summer in BC, it was former retired ambassadors who were helping and train through the process. So very helpful throughout that entire process. But even if you don't happen to get one of the fellowships, just take a shot and take the test. I happen to know a fellow friend of mine who had passed the FSOA the summer before they got in the fellowship, so they just kind of edited their timeline around that.
It might just chime in quickly. For USAID, there is no foreign service, exam. There's an application, and then there's a long interview when joining the foreign service, but there's not like the standard FSOT at all. It's a different approach to hiring.
Thank you for clarifying that, Ken. There's two questions that are a little bit similar, so I'm gonna put them together, but one of them is specifically for Ken. You mentioned that one of the main responsibilities for foreign service officers is problem solving. Who decides what those problems are? And the other question that's pretty similar, I'd say, is what are the challenges that you all face in your jobs? And how are you preparing to survive the next 4 years?
Okay, so I'll try to hit all of those quickly. So as far as who decides, I mean, there's a lot of voices. It depends where you are as well. So we develop usually 5-year strategies called the country the CDCS, the country development. I'm forgetting our acronym, but it's a 5-year strategy for USAID. That also puts into a 5-year strategy, depending where we are, of the overall embassy, as we're part of the embassy team. And member of the embassy, which is called the Integrated Country Strategy. So that's at a very high level, looking at what are the biggest priorities, and those are usually based on some sort of problem analysis. As we break down that strategy, we'll look at, there'll be the overall goal and development objectives and sub-objectives, that these are the things we're trying to get at. And then with that, we start looking and analyzing at a more detailed level. I think it's at the detail level, probably led by the technical office director and his or her team, and then reviewed by mission management, both the deputy mission director, deputy mission director, or in the mission director as well at that level. And I blanked on the second question.
What are some of the challenges that foreign service officers face on the job, and how does the change in administration affect what those problems might look like?
So one challenge is you see now in a change of administration changes, priorities change, and can change really, I'd say, significantly. So if you're, just say you're working, designing a program, you're working with a government and a community, and you're kind of going in this direction, and you have like kind of joint plans together, but that foreign policy direction changes. Sometimes that's a challenging thing to negotiate with government or with local civil society, because it's a significant, pivot after you've been talking about a different style of program intervention. So that's one. Second thing is I would say just time management. I've been at posts where like we're incessantly really busy. And so it is just a challenge of just trying to constantly prioritize. I always talk about doing like development triage, because you're always just trying to say you have a lot of different priorities. and things to do, and how to really narrow that down to be most efficient and effective in your job.
Thanks, Ken. Stewart, Max, do you have anything to add?
Well, it's not going to be too different from what Ken was just saying. For me and many of my colleagues, and Jackie Fields, who, by the way, the diplomat in residence and the host institution is FIU. She's right there, figuratively speaking, so you can contact her. But the challenge we face in the Foreign Service, and by the way, regardless of what the career track is, you're constantly multitasking. I don't like that word. I know a lot of people don't, because there's some inefficiencies. No, it's quite inefficient to do that, but there really is no choice, because our Washington and various different entities, they're not necessarily concerned with the multitasking. They've got responsibilities either to the constituents, or to Congress, or to the secretary, or to the president. So you're juggling all of those, in addition to juggling the requirements actually at the mission on a daily basis from our own chief of mission, or in maybe the USAID's case, the mission director, and in my case, maybe the deputy chief of mission. So yeah, multitasking on a daily basis, it's very challenging, but it's something that can't be avoided.
Thank you, Stewart. We're running a little bit low on time, so I'll try to get through maybe one or two more questions before we conclude here today. But one question I think would be really useful would be, at what point in one's academic career is it recommended to pursue an internship, either with the Department of State, the Department of Defense, or with USAID?
It's a Maximo question there.
Yeah, guess I'll take it. There are certainly a handful of different programs that state at the very least offers. I can't speak too much in terms of defense. There might be some folks over at the Jack D. Gordon Institute who might be able to give you a few pointers in regards to that one. But at least with state, they start looking very early on. Even when I was interning over in Brussels, there were people 18, 19, 20 who had already gotten some of these internships, and state still offers, to my knowledge, paid internships, both domestically and for abroad as well. There are some opportunities, the naming escapes me at the moment, but where you have 2 summer worth of internships absolutely guaranteed from, I believe, your sophomore and junior year, or your junior year and senior year onward. It is somewhere there, and for the life of me, if I could find it, I'll post it in the chat. But they're just looking that you have just met the minimum GPA requirement, and that you have the dedication and the push to serve. It's a lot easier to try to bring in the best amount of talent if you pull them in early on. But yeah, there's those opportunities, and of course there are different programs, Diplomacy Lab, but there are some also more virtual opportunities that are still kicking around, to my knowledge. But they're certainly out there.
Thanks, Max. And then I'll end with this final question. Is becoming an FSO possible later in life as a second career? Would love to know if this is a possibility down the road when my kids are grown and I could accept various assignments around the world.
The U.S. Department of State, it's absolutely possible. As Maximo was mentioning earlier about accepting young people in their 20s, that's normal. And also accepting what we call mid-career professionals. We use the term mid-career professionals as a bucket of, that means people have already been in the workforce, they're already out there. So those are mid-career. Myself, I was a military guy, former lieutenant colonel, and I came into the Foreign Service. And so it was just really something. We have people that have come from all walks of life. Do you know one of my previous colleagues, and I'm not making this up, her degree was in dance. She's a political affairs officer. So the reason why I bring things like that up is to say that, guess what? There's a place for all kinds of different all kinds of academic backgrounds. So you don't have to limit yourself to just this. You don't need to necessarily change your, if you will, your academic major. That's what I was looking for, your academic major, this kind of thing. And by the way, this is very true. And I like what Maximo said about the internship. We have the U.S. Foreign Service Student Internship Programs. That's paid. All of our internships are paid. That's 2 internships. One is in D.C. and the other is at one of our embassies overseas. The other is just called the State Department Internship Program, and that's where it's just one of those. So that's very important for them to realize. So if your children are already, if you will, out of the house, or even if your children are not out of the house, and you happen to be in a career in this, that, or the other, go to careers.state.gov, and you will see there are many opportunities for mid-career professionals.
Thank you so much, Stewart. Ken, I saw that you mentioned something in the chat. I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to chime in on this question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I would say absolutely. You know, the cutoff for hiring is 59. But just a reminder, there's a mandatory retirement at age 65 for foreign service officers. Yeah, there's lots of people who have a career like I did, a career beforehand, and then shift over to be foreign service or civil service. I joined USAID in my probably late 40s or so.
Thank you so much. Well, we're at time, and I want to respect everyone's time and just say a really, really huge thank you to our panelists, Maximo, Stewart, and Ken. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. I know it's inspiring for me, and I remember back to my time as a student and how important these kinds of sessions were to developing my ideas about the future and kind of like career planning and academic planning in general. So thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much to the FIU Global Learning team for inviting us to speak today. And I'll pass it over to Joneri. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierina. It was such an honor to have you all in today's panel session. It definitely was an inspiring one. As a reminder, TTR continues again next week with another session. It's this time online as well from Partnerships for Public Service. So join us again next week. Thank you, everyone.